Hi beautiful people, it's Steph here if you don't already know, and on this channel I just talk about all things careers and all things lifestyle. And in today's video I am going to be giving you the lowdown and the tea about my past 6 months as a private equity trainee solicitor. So if you like this type of content, please do make sure that you like, comment, subscribe, and let's get straight into the video. Okay, so before we get straight into the video, what exactly is private equity? And the way I like to think about this is thinking about the fact that when a company needs financing, there are generally two forms of financing, right? We've got your debt, so your loans, things like that, and then we've got equity, so somebody buying shares essentially in a company. And what private equity is it's basically a different investment class. And all it is that the company or the organization, the vehicle or whatever, is investing in another company, i.e. it's buying another company, whether it's through a takeover or something like that, but it has to be a private company that they're buying, i.e. a company that's not listed on any stock exchange. So that's what makes it private equity, right? And there can be loads of different reasons for this. I think the most common one that I personally saw would be like maybe there's an intention of, you're buying the company and then a couple of years down the line, the company might go public or something like that. So the idea is that whilst you've got the company for, let's say, 3 years, 5 years or something like that, you increase the value of the company, maybe through a management incentive plan or something like that. And then when the company goes public and you kind of get your money back from the shares that are then listed, you've then made a profit, right? And the analogy that I kind of think of to just help me understand that is if you were to buy a house, let's say you bought a house for like £100 or something like that. Obviously, you cannot buy a house for £100 in this day and age, but stick with me because I'm not a numbers girl, so let's make it easy numbers. So you buy a house for £100, you put in like £20 to redecorate the house, so you get a loft conversion, you paint the walls, you buy some nice stuff or whatever, and then you sell your house. The value of the house now becomes £500 just from that £20 investment, and then you can sell the house for £500, right? So you've made that little tidy profit. And I think that's a similar kind of conception with private equity. The idea is that these private equity houses are investing in these private companies with the end goal of making a return on their investment. So hopefully that all makes sense. What exactly did I do? Honestly, I did so many things. And I think it was a combination of the fact that this was obviously my third seat, i.e. I'd been doing, the training contract for about a year now. And I'd done 2 previous transactional seats as well. So there were a number of things that you have to do in a private equity seat that I had already kind of come across. So for example, signings, and that's something I've spoken about in a lot of previous videos, so I won't go over it again, but things like that, those were things that I've done before, right? So I did things like that. I also did research, and this is one of the first times that I've actually had to do a lot, I would say, of legal research. In my previous 2 seats, I just didn't really have that much exposure to it. So by research, it would be things like, a client has maybe requested a particular type of thing. So like maybe they've said, they've heard about this like case or something like that, and they want to know how it might affect them. And I'd have to do legal research on a case, like using Westlaw or LexisNexis or whatever. Or the other side of research could be like maybe we're writing an article, again for clients or just generally for thought leadership. And that's what we call business development. And again, I would do like research around that as well. So I did a fair bit of that on ESG though, which I love. So that was actually quite cool. In terms of deal work, oh my goodness. So in my first 2 seats, right, in debt finance and in capital markets, I guess because they were both finance practice areas, the thing with finance that I've come to realize is that it's very structured and it's very repetitive in the sense that a deal, yes, will be bespoke in the sense that, it will be different parties and maybe a couple of different commercial nuances. But in the grand scheme of things, like each financial deal is pretty much the same. You follow the same steps. PE, it's not like that. I did a reorganization deal, and on a reorganization deal, you're probably going to be incorporating a new so a new company, which is something that a trainee would do and kind of run with. You're probably going to be drafting what we call the reorganization document. So your reorganization documents are going to be things like maybe you setting up a SPA, so a share purchase agreement, because maybe some assets are being transferred within different parties in the group being all of the companies who are under the same kind of parent. You're probably going to have, I'm trying to think what other kind of documents you would have, your STFs, your stock transfer forms. So whenever there is a transfer of shares in a company, the actual instrument that we use under UK law is called an STF, a stock transfer form. So drafting those, that's definitely something a trainee would be doing. What other kind of documents would we have in a reorganization? I mean, I guess it just depends on the nature of the reorganization, but those are probably like your main documents. Like your SPA is definitely your main one, and then your STF would be the ancillaries. Any post-closing stuff, so like things like updating the register of members, updating the PSC register, the persons of significant control, these are all statutory requirements. And it may or may not be you as a trainee doing this, because it just depends on if the company has a secretary or not. If the company has a secretary, then you would just be instructing the secretary. So there's a lot of like kind of client handholding there. But if the company doesn't have a secretary, then it probably is going to be you doing that as well. So that's just a reorganization. The other thing that you might be doing is maybe like a buyout, right? So with that, I think when I did a buyout, I didn't actually draft the main transaction document. So again, you would have like an SPA, your share purchase agreement, which would be your main kind of document. And then there would be a couple of ancillaries as well. And corporate authorizations, of course, your board minutes, your shareholder resolutions, etc. But what I did do was a lot of the post-closing stuff again. So things like filing the relevant forms at Companies House. So we have what we call like SH forms, and depending on what exactly it is you're doing, you might have to file like an SH01 or an SH03 or whatever. Just depends on what it is that you're doing. So there were things like that. Then the other type of deal, which I think is a bit more of a mergers and acquisitions generally deal, is when there's just your usual kind of, you know, your client wants to buy a target, right? Or you could be on the other side as well. But generally, we're acting for the client who wants to buy a target. And what are we doing there? Due diligence. Now, I have spoken about due diligence before, but I think when I did due diligence in my finance seats, it was from a different kind of angle. It wasn't necessarily the same as what I did in my corporate PEC. So due diligence here was a couple of different things. First of all, we as the corporate lawyers have to have an understanding of every single area. So we have to have a general understanding of like the employment issues, the finance issues, the litigation issues, the IP issues, etc., etc. Obviously, we have specialists in those areas who do the detailed review, but we have to have an understanding of what's the client's kind of bottom line in terms of what is going to impact the price of the deal, and then what could potentially be an issue and what should we be flagging to the specialist teams so that they can be kind of focusing on that, if that makes sense. So there was definitely a more broader focus to due diligence, whereas in my finance seats, I was kind of like just focusing on the finance stuff, right? So for example, I remember in my capital market seat, I had to do some due diligence where I looked at some loan notes, and I was literally just looking at things like change of control provisions and stuff like that. So it was a very specific, you know, thing that I was doing in due diligence. Whereas in my corporate seat, it was like, okay, there's 167 documents to review. Let's go, that kind of thing. So there's that difference. I also had to go at writing a due diligence report. So I did the first cut of a DD report, which is honestly, it can be anything from like 30 to probably like 200 pages. It just depends on how high level or how in depth the report actually is in terms of detail. But I was able to do that, and I got some really, really good feedback on that as well. And that's something that typically, you know, either a very experienced trainee or a junior associate would be doing. So I was really, really happy to do that kind of work. So those are probably the three, I don't even want to say types of deals, but like the three things that you would likely be doing as a trainee. And those are three things that I did do, as well as the research kind of BD stuff that I said I did as well. The other things that I did during my seat was I delivered a presentation. So I did a presentation on the role of ESG in private equity. There's no kind of requirements as to what the presentations have to be on. I just liked ESG and I was in private equity. So for me, it just made sense to research something that I enjoy. But I had to deliver a kind of like 5-minute presentation on that to the whole team. And that again was really, really good experience for me, because obviously as lawyers, typically you might be pitching to clients or you might have to deliver internal presentations or whatever. So it's generally just good practice. And also the SRA kind of requirements in terms of the little tick boxes that they ask for when they see what kind of well-rounded experience you have. One of them is you kind of being able to demonstrate that you can present and you can speak clearly and all that sort of stuff as well. So that was that. I'm trying to think if there was anything else generally that I did. One thing that I noticed, and I think I did actually speak about this a little bit on my Instagram page, in terms of the different skills that I have come to realize are really, really important in the different practice areas that I've been in. So in this particular practice area in private equity, I've come to realize that the skill that you need to hone is problem solving. It is really problem solving. And it's problem solving in the sense that there's probably 4 or 5 different ways that you can do a particular thing that a client has asked you to do. But you need to decide what to do based off of your knowledge of the particular industry of the client, based off of what is going to be the kind of least admin heavy thing for you to do, because obviously the more documents that there are, the more you're probably going to have to build to the client, because the more there is to do. And obviously from a commercial perspective, the client doesn't want that. You probably don't want to be handling all of those documents, so you want the most kind of efficient way to do things, should I say. But then obviously also the most best commercially practical way to do things as well, like I mentioned. And also just generally, I think because it's such a fast-paced environment, there are probably going to be mistakes, either through your proofreading that you might pick up, or just generally when you ask questions, you'll realize that actually, this maybe should have been done or something like that. So you need to kind of be quick on your feet and think about how to solve problems. And a really good approach that I kind of found was helpful throughout the seat was, if you notice something, just kind of raise it as a question and just say, look, I was just having a look through the documents, or I was just proofreading this or whatever, and I spotted this, is this something that we need to do X, Y, Z about? So don't just raise a problem, but also raise a solution as well. I think that's really, really key. So yeah, what have we spoken about? We've spoken about what private equity is. We've spoken about the key deals and kind of work that I did, as well as obviously BD as well, business development. Also spoken about the key skills that I think are really, really important for making a good private equity lawyer, being problem solving. What else can I tell you about private equity and my past seat? The hours. I know everybody's going to ask about the hours. Now, I kind of alluded to this quite a few times over the course of my seat whenever people would ask me about things like work-life balance and hours and stuff like that. Private equity is probably... Actually, was it my longest hours seat? I don't actually think it was. And to be honest, I think that was for a couple of different reasons. And that's not to say that the seat wasn't busy. The seat was very busy. I did a lot of work, but I think maybe because I was in my 3rd seat, I'm not sure, but I had a bit more of an understanding and a handle of my capacity, i.e., if someone asked me to do something and asked if I was able to do it within a particular time frame, it was a lot easier for me to work out whether I actually could or I couldn't do that. And I found that 9 times out of 10, when you tell someone, look, I can't get this done by 5, but I can do it tomorrow by 9, unless it's actually urgent and needs to be done by 5, they'll just be like, okay, yeah, sure, it's fine, give it to me tomorrow at 9. Or if it really does need to be 5, they'll either find someone else to do it or they'll do it themselves. Communication is basically really key when it comes to capacity in that kind of sense. So I found because of that, this probably actually wasn't the seat with my longest hours, if I'm being very honest. And I know for a lot of people who have done a corporate seat or a PE seat, probably has been the seat with their longest hours just because of the nature of the work. What I would say in terms of hours though, in private equity is this: it can be very, very unpredictable, incredibly unpredictable. And I'm talking, you could think you're wrapped up by 5 p.m. and then something could just hit your inbox at 9. So you've had 4 hours of nothing, complete silence. You genuinely think you're logged off for the day. And then as a force of habit, you'll just look at your phone and you'll just see that there's suddenly things to do, if that makes sense. So it can be quite unpredictable in that sense of the word. And I think that can be difficult to manage if, again, you're maybe not that good with communicating your capacity or just kind of understanding when things are urgent and stuff like that. But the key there is to just ask questions, because at the end of the day, you're working as a part of a team, right? So you're not just doing this work by yourself. There'll be an associate, there'll be a partner or whatever. So just ask people, when do you need this by? A great way to phrase the question. If they need it immediately, you will know because they will tell you. If they don't need it immediately, they'll say, you can do it tomorrow, you can do it for lunchtime, whatever. So I would always say just ask that question. But yeah, that's just to say that my hours were not terrible, if I'm personally being honest. In terms of actual work-life balance, because again, that's something that people tend to ask about, I think my work-life balance was actually overall okay. And I say that because I can't think of anything that I had to cancel, for example. I haven't had to cancel any plan. To be fair, I've never had to cancel any plans in my whole training contract, if I'm being honest. But especially in that seat, I didn't have to cancel any plans. I was still able to, you know, do my like content creation, all that kind of stuff. I was still able to catch up with friends. I still went on holidays. So I went to Portugal back in, when did I go to Portugal? Was that in this seat? I don't even remember. Did I go on holiday in this seat? When did I start this seat? Oh no, I started this seat in March. Portugal was last year. Okay, I didn't go on holiday. Oh no, but I went away to Reading. I went on my spa trip. Yeah, so like I've done different things. Do you get what I mean? Like, and I haven't had to like falter on any of those things, so that was pretty cool. So for the final part of this video, I'm going to be answering the questions that you guys submitted on my Instagram, because I did ask if there were any specific questions that you guys wanted me to answer about my private equity seat. So let's go. First question is, what challenges did you face? I think, and this is probably a challenge that you would face with any seat or like any new team, but it was just the fact that I hadn't done it before. Like, I can be a bit of a perfectionist sometimes, so I generally don't like when I'm asked to do something and I just, you know, don't really know what to do. I obviously know that I can ask questions, but I have this like mental thing of I don't want to appear stupid, quote unquote, by asking questions that I feel like maybe I should know. But with that, I kind of just combat it by reminding myself that obviously A, I'm a trainee, and B, like, I actually haven't done it before, so I don't know why I should think that I need to know something that if I've never had exposure to before, like why would I know it, kind of thing. For me, it's more kind of a mental thing, but I had really supportive people that I was working with throughout the 6 months, so I generally always felt like I could ask for help when I needed to, like all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a challenge, but it was okay. Second question is, how could you have prepared for the seat? That's a good question. I think it's not like uni, so that there's not like pre-reading that I would say you could do for any seat, to be honest. But one thing that I think you probably can and should do to help you prepare for any new seat is speak to either trainees who you know, so like if they're your friends who have done that seat before, whether in your firm or in other firms. Probably more helpful if it's your firm, just because, you know, every firm has like particular client rosters or particular ways that they do things. So if you're speaking to someone in your firm, then obviously it directly correlates to what you are going to be doing. But just for like general understanding, it can still be helpful to speak to trainees at other firms who have done that seat as well. So definitely do that. And also maybe ask, and this might be more like NQs or maybe supervisors who might be able to help you with this, but also trainees as well. So don't be afraid to ask, but ask for like a little checklist of what kind of things should you have done or should you be able to do by the end of the seat. So for example, I'm thinking of like, if you're in a transactional seat, by the end of the seat, you should probably know how to send what we call a Mercury signing email, right? And that's just the signing instructions that you send when you're closing a deal. You should probably know how to maybe not run a signing by yourself. It depends on what seat you're in, to be fair. Nobody is expecting a first seater to run a signing. But maybe if you're like in your fourth seat, you might have, you know, had enough exposure to signings that you might be able to do it by yourself, kind of thing. So maybe something like that. Maybe drafting corporate authorizations like board minutes, shareholder resolutions, etc., etc. So the point I'm getting at is that whatever seat you're going into, I'd maybe say just ask around to see if you can kind of put together like a little checklist of this is what you need to have done by the end of the seat to just kind of help with your own personal development. And I think the final thing I would say to do to prepare, and this is what I always personally do, is I always reach out to my supervisor like the week before, or depends on like leave and all that kind of stuff, but like before I join the seat, I reach out to my supervisor and I would just ask kind of basic working things. So things like, how do you like to work? Like, are you a morning person? Are you a night person? Printing stuff, like how do you like things printed? How do you like things done? Like, do you like changes to be done in track changes, or do you like red lines? And these are all just like random phrases that if you're not in the industry, you honestly just might not know, but it's not really that important. But the point is just asking how they like little professional things to be done, because those are the little things that like everyone can be very different with how they like it. So I think it is important to just check with who you're working with to make sure that you kind of align on those things. And yeah, I think once you've done that, that's kind of all the preparation you really need to do. Like, I wouldn't say you need to go and sit down and read up about the whole area or anything like that, because you're likely going to be given at the barest minimum like maybe a week of training or something like that in a given practice area, and that's before you start, right? Obviously you'll have continuous training whilst you're there, but before you start you'll be given some training. So that's kind of all the pre-reading, quote unquote, that you would be doing. Next question we had is, what does a trainee do in a PE seat? So I kind of spoke about it a bit earlier in terms of what I personally did. One thing I would say, and this is definitely the case at my firm, and I would assume it's the case at other firms as well, because trainees are assigned a supervisor, there are generally two ways that you might do work, right? So the first way is that you get all your work through your supervisor, or you may have your work through the team. So maybe there's like a centralized allocation system, and then whenever a deal comes in, it's just allocated to whoever has capacity, right? So for me, I got some work from my supervisor, but then I also just worked with other associates and other partners as well. And that just meant that the type of deals that I was doing was always, you know, depending on what like those associates were doing, right? I would say that generally speaking, you're probably going to be handling like things like post-closing things. That's generally something that the most junior member of the team handles. So post-closing being any filings that need to be done at company's house, general kind of admin in terms of like updating documents or saving documents or creating what we call a Bible, which is basically just a folder of all of the transaction documents, things like that. That's probably going to be a trainee task. Depending on what you're working on, you probably will do some drafting. So like I said, I actually drafted a DD report, as well as also drafting a shareholders agreement. I drafted a SPA, so a share purchase agreement. I drafted a bunch of ancillary documents, so the stock transfer forms, the board resolutions, the shareholder resolutions, etc. So I did a fair bit of drafting. I did do some proofreading here and there, so you might be doing some proofreading, but there's probably going to be a lot of like AI and technology tools that can help you with that as well. So it's not always just a case of kind of printing and reading with like a red pen. And then, like I mentioned as well, the kind of research and business development, that's definitely probably something you'll be getting involved with too. So that's what I did, and I assume that's what the majority of kind of trainees would be doing in a PE seat, but obviously ask around with other people as well and see what they say. What type of work do lawyers do in PE? Yeah, again, so I won't repeat what I already said, but it's basically like what I said before. And I think the easiest way to think about what type of work lawyers do in PE is to remember what PE is. So remember, PE, private equity, is just an alternative investment kind of class, whereby companies are investing in private companies, i.e. companies that are not listed on any stock exchange. So hopefully that will make sense. That is just a little rundown of how my last 6 months were in private equity. I am now, if you don't already know, currently in a project finance seat out in Houston. So I'm having a great time. But if you like this kind of content, please do make sure that you like, comment and subscribe, and I'll be back again soon with another video.